Nearly 1,000 years after the fall of ancient Rome, its eastern part still stands proudly as an eternal witness to its glorious past. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine, was a magnificent power that stretched from the Balkans to Asia Minor, from the Mediterranean coast to the Caucasus Mountains. Its capital, Constantinople, with its towering Theodosian walls, was once considered an impregnable fortress of Christianity, a symbol of the wisdom, faith, and continued power of the ancient Roman Empire. But by the 11th century, the light of Byzantine had begun to fade. Centuries of civil war, corruption, and bureaucracy had weakened a state that had once been the center of Christendom. The elite army that had once terrified the Mediterranean had disintegrated, replaced by foreign mercenaries who fought not for honor, but for gold. The nobility fought for power. Each territory became its own autonomous fiefdom, separate from the central power. The people were weary, religion became a political tool, and the court was engulfed in intrigue. Meanwhile, to the east, a new wind blew from the Central Asian steppe, carrying the smell of horse dust and the smoke of war. It was the Seljuk Turks, nomadic Muslim warriors, who had served in the Abbasid army, now building their own empire. They moved like the wind, hit and run, and nothing could stop them from advancing westward. As they passed through Persia and reached Armenia, the gates of Anatolia, the heart of Byzantium, began to shake. For the Byzantines, Anatolia was not only a strategic land, but also the lifeblood of the empire. It provided wheat horses, soldiers, and resources. Losing Anatolia meant losing military and economic power, losing the soul of the Roman East. So when the eastern border was threatened, the Byzantine emperor understood that this was a life-or-death battle. In those dark times, a man stepped up to the throne with the desire to restore the glory of his ancestors. That was Romanos IV Diogenes, a general of noble birth, battle-hardened in the Balkans and Asia Minor. He was not born into royalty, but a true warrior, tough, brave, and with a sharp military vision. Romanos understood that to save the empire, he needed to reform the army and restore discipline. He intensified training, gathered loyal generals, and planned a counterattack against the Turks. But not everyone in the Constantinople court supported him. The powerful in the church and the nobility looked at Romanos with suspicion. They feared that his rise would overshadow their interests. In the shadows, plots of betrayal began to form. However, Romanos remained steadfast. In 1071, he decided to launch a major campaign to recapture the lost territory and push the Turks back into the desert. He mustered some 40,000 men, including core Byzantine units, along with thousands of mercenaries from Normandy, Armenia, Georgia, and even the Pecheneg Turks, former enemies of the empire. It was a motley, multilingual army, loyal to money rather than the emperor. But Romanos had no choice. He had to act before the empire collapsed. On the other side, Sultan Alp Arslan, the fearless lion of the Seljuk Turks, had just finished his campaign in Syria and was heading east to confront his Persian enemies. When he heard that the Byzantines were advancing deep into his territory, he turned back, mustering a small army of only 30,000 men, all mobile and skilled cavalry. For Alp Arslan, the war was not just about defending territory, but also about proving that the new Islamic empire could challenge the 1,000-year-old power of Rome. Two armies, two civilizations, two religions, and two destinies are moving towards each other. Fate has ordained a battle that will change the course of the entire medieval world. The town of Manzikert is located in the Armenian highlands near Lake Van, a wild and rugged place. This is a strategic land connecting Asia Minor with Mesopotamia, a natural gateway between east and west. The Byzantine army arrived here in August 1071 in the middle of a dry summer where the sun burned the ground and the wind carried the dust of the dry fields. Romanos divided his army into two wings. One wing was assigned to General Joseph Tarchanaiotes to hold the northern region, protecting the rear. The other wing, commanded by the emperor himself, advanced on Manzikert. This decision seemed reasonable, but was fatally wrong. When the fighting began, Tarchanaiotes suddenly disappeared from the battlefield. No one knows why. Some say he withdrew out of fear, others say he betrayed the order of the opposing faction in the court. Whatever the reason, the disappearance left Romanos isolated. Before him stood a battle-hardened Seljuk Turk army. Behind him were unreliable allies. But Romanos still believed in the strength and discipline of his troops. He decided to attack first, hoping to defeat Alp Arslan in a quick battle. Alp Arslan, on the other hand, was in no hurry. He knew his opponents were outnumbered, better equipped, but slow and disorganized. The Seljuk Turks used familiar nomadic tactics, harassing from a distance, firing arrows incessantly, then retreating, tiring and impatient. For days they moved fluidly around the Byzantine formation like wolves circling a giant prey. On August 26, 1071, the skies over the Armenian highlands were covered in a thick layer of gray clouds. The atmosphere was tense throughout the Byzantine camp. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes' army had been marching for days in the scorching sun, short of food, water, and low in morale. Ahead of them lay the citadel of Manzikert, now controlled by the Seljuk Turks. In the distance, columns of smoke from the Muslim camp rose, signaling the inevitable battle. Romanos, clad in heavy iron armor, rode out to the front of the army. He looked out at the thousands of warriors bearing the imperial double-headed eagle, the symbol of a civilization that had reigned for nearly a millennium. His eyes shone with Roman pride mixed with barely concealed anxiety. He understood that if he lost today, not only would he lose his throne, but the entire empire could collapse. Facing Romanos was Alp Arslan, the Sultan of the Seljuk Turks. He wore no gold or silver armor, but a simple white robe. Before the battle, Alp Arslan knelt down, prayed toward Mecca, then turned to his men and said, if they died today, they would go to heaven as soldiers of Allah, and if they won, they would open the gates of the Promised Land. These words caused thousands of Seljuk cavalry to roar their drums and horns to thunderous sounds. Vultures began to circle the sky above, a sign of a bloody day. As the sun rose, Romanos ordered a general attack. The Byzantines moved in their traditional formation. The center was the heavy infantry, the wings were the cavalry, and the rear was the reserve. They advanced like a giant block of iron, solid but slow. The Seljuk Turks, borne on horseback, moved lightly and maneuverably. They did not engage head-on, but fired arrows from a distance. Thousands of arrows whistled through the air, falling like rain. Each volley of arrows threw the Byzantine ranks into disarray. The heavily armored knights tried to pursue the enemy, but the enemy disappeared before they could reach them. Alp Arslan's cavalry feigned retreat, luring the Byzantines deeper into the open, where they had no supplies and could not receive orders to adjust. By late afternoon, Romanos realized that his formation had stretched too far. The units behind him were beginning to lose their hearing. When he ordered a retreat to camp to reorganize, the signal was misinterpreted as a retreat. In an instant, the already disordered ranks collapsed. The right wing, commanded by Andronikos Doukas, suddenly turned and fled. Some historians believe that Doukas betrayed him deliberately because the Doukas family were political enemies of Romanos and were waiting for an opportunity to overthrow him. This betrayal left the center of the army exposed, and the Seljuk Turks immediately attacked. Alp Arslan ordered a full-scale counterattack. His cavalry charged like a whirlwind, encircling the Byzantine formation from all sides. There were shouts in Arabic and Turkish. Thousands of arrows cut through the air, the metal of spears and swords reflected in the sunset. The Byzantines fought desperately, but their strength had been sapped. They had lost coordination discipline and were in a state of fear and chaos. By sunset, the battlefield of Manzikert had turned into a sea of blood. Bodies lay strewn across the steppe, screams metal clashing, and the neighing of horses were heard everywhere. Romanos tried to rally the imperial guard to open a path of retreat, but the enemy had already surrounded him. He was wounded in the arm and shoulder, and his horse was killed underfoot. The Eastern Roman emperor was dragged to the ground surrounded by Seljuk Turk cavalry. A Seljuk warrior approached and pulled off his helmet, but when he realized that the man he had captured was the emperor, he stopped. Romanos IV Diogenes, the last Roman emperor to lead an army into battle, had been captured alive. The next morning, Alp Arslan ordered the prisoners brought into the tent. When Romanos was brought in, the Turks did not cheer or jeer, but silently looked at him, the man who had once been considered the son of the greatest empire in Europe. Alp Arslan walked up, unsheathed his bow and sword, and asked, "If I were captured by you, what would you do to me?" Romanos replied, "I would kill you or make a laughingstock of you in my capital." Alp Arslan smiled and said, "But I will not do that." He untied Romanos, invited him to sit on a mat, served him tea, and declared that there would now be only negotiations between them, not enmity. This meeting was described by later historians as one of the rare moments of magnanimity between two enemies. Alp Arslan treated the captured emperor kindly, asking only for a ransom and a promise of peace. After a few days, he released Romanos. In the eyes of the Muslim king, this victory needed no more bloodshed. He had achieved what he wanted, control of Asia Minor and prestige over the whole of Islam. But fate did not end there. When Romanos returned to Constantinople, he was not greeted as a survivor, but as a defeated one. The court nobility, especially the Ducas faction, took advantage of this opportunity to overthrow him. Romanos was arrested, accused of treason, and sentenced to be blinded in both eyes with a red-hot iron. He died alone a few months later, leaving behind a dying empire. The last emperor to take up arms in battle fell not to the hands of his eastern enemies, but to the machinations of his own palace. After the Battle of Manzikert, all of Asia Minor, the richest and most populous region of the Byzantine Empire, fell to the Seljuk Turks. One important city after another fell. Thousands of Christians fled their homeland, villages were burned, churches were turned into mosques. The empire lost its food, its soldiers, and its faith. Terror spread throughout Constantinople, where people whispered that God had turned against them. The loss was not just of territory, but of the soul of the empire. Asia Minor had been the birthplace of Byzantine generals, scholars, and missionaries. Now it was in Muslim hands, and from that land a new empire would rise, the Ottoman Empire, to fulfill the destiny begun by Alp Arslan. For the Byzantines, Manzikert was the beginning of the end. For the Turks, it was the dawn of a new age. But regardless of the side, the battle opened an irreparable rift between two worlds, the world of the cross and the crescent. The fall of Asia Minor forced the Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, his successor, to turn his desperate eyes to the west, where the Christian kingdoms were rising. From Constantinople, he wrote to Pope Urban II, pleading for help against the Turks. That cry, which seemed to be the desperate cry of a dying empire, became the spark that ignited the longest and bloodiest war of the Middle Ages. The Crusades. At Manzikert, the Romans lost their land. But in that darkness, another fire was lit, a fire of faith, fanaticism, and ambition, which would burn both worlds for the next 2 centuries. And it all began with this battle, where an empire fell and a new era arose. The Battle of Manzikert was not just a military defeat, but a turning point that reshaped the political, religious, and civilizational landscape of the entire medieval world. After that fateful day, what had once been considered a strong fortress of Christianity in the East gradually faded away. The Eastern Roman Empire, which had existed with the pride of ancient Rome, began to slide into irreversible decline. When news of the defeat and the capture of Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes reached Constantinople, the capital was shaken. Many could not believe that the Roman army, which had defeated so many enemies, had been destroyed by a nomadic army from the Far East. Religious faith was shaken. The nobility fell into panic. In the streets of Constantinople, curses, prayers, and tears mixed together. In the palace, intrigue and betrayal reigned. Within a few years of Manzikert, more than 2/3 of the empire's territory in Asia Minor fell to the Seljuk Turks. Wealthy cities such as Nicaea, Caesarea, and Iconium fell one after another. Tens of thousands of Christians fled to the Balkans or across the sea to Greece. The economy of Asia Minor, which depended on agriculture and trade, was devastated. From then on, the Byzantine Empire lost its source of soldiers, lost control of the east-west trade routes, and was isolated among the rising powers around it. This collapse did not come overnight, but Manzikert was the first crack that caused the entire Byzantine power structure to crack. In the following years, rebellions broke out everywhere, and generals vied for the throne. By 1081, when Alexios III Komnenos ascended the throne, the empire was a shadow of its former self. To defend Constantinople and hope to regain Asia Minor, he was forced to do what previous emperors had never dared to do: send a plea to the West. Alexios wrote to Pope Urban II describing the brutality of the Seljuk Turks pleading for aid. For him, it was a desperate act to save the rest of the empire. But for the Pope, it was an opportunity to unite Christianity after centuries of division between East and West, and to expand Roman influence. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont in France, Urban II stood before thousands of people and called on the knights and nobles of Europe to liberate Jerusalem from the infidels. The call shook Europe. Tens of thousands of people from all walks of life, knights, peasants, merchants, carried out crosses. They called it the Crusade, the War of the Cross. And so the First Crusade, 1096-1099, was born, initiating 2 centuries of conflict between Christianity and Islam. Without Manzikert, there would probably never have been a crusade. It was this failure that brought the East to its knees and the West to its wake. The divided kingdoms of Europe found common cause: faith. But beneath that faith lay a thirst for power, glory, and wealth. This war, supposedly holy, actually plunged the world into a new vortex of bloodshed. While the Crusaders were advancing on Jerusalem, Byzantium survived only through skillful political and diplomatic maneuvering. Alexios III tried to use the Crusades to regain territory, but at the same time he feared that the Western Christian armies would turn on Constantinople. These fears were not unfounded, for 2 centuries later, during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, the Crusaders did what the Turks could not. They captured and sacked Constantinople. The glorious Christian city was burned, its churches plundered, and the Eastern Roman Empire was temporarily dissolved. From then on, the Byzantines never recovered. In retrospect, many historians believe that the Battle of Manzikert was the beginning of a chain reaction. A military defeat led to political crisis, then religious division, and finally the collapse of civilization. The event showed that no matter how glorious an empire was, if it lacked unity and discipline, military might would be meaningless. Romanos IV. Diogenes, the brave but lonely emperor, did not fail because of poor strategy, but because of betrayal by those he trusted. The Battle of Manzikert also left a profound lesson about the changing times. It was a time when the nomadic, agile, and flexible tactics of the Seljuk Turks defeated the heavy classical strategy of the Romans. The era of armored legions and fortified citadels was replaced by an era of mobile armies, guerrilla warfare, and religious faith as a banner. In terms of civilization, Manzikert opened the door for the exchange and conflict between East and West. After the defeat, thousands of Byzantine scholars fled to Italy, bringing with them books and knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome. It was these streams of people who sowed the seeds of the Renaissance in Europe. In the death of one empire, another era of knowledge is born, as if history always reborn from its own ashes. But for the remaining Byzantines, the years after Manzikert were years of nostalgia and bitterness. They still lived in the old glory, still called themselves Romans, still believed that Constantinople was the citadel of God. However, the years gradually proved that fate had changed. By 1453, nearly 4 centuries after Manzikert, the Ottoman Empire, descendants of the Seljuk Turks, conquered Constantinople, completely ending the existence of Eastern Rome. And like a cruel circle, the victory of the Turks began from that very place, Manzikert. Looking back from the distance of time, the Battle of Manzikert appears not only as a disaster, but as a tragic song about the rise and fall of civilizations. It reminds people that no empire is eternal, no glory is immortal. Every power carries within it the seeds of destruction, if people forget the ideals and solidarity that once created it. Manzikert is a reminder of the fragility of human power before the laws of history. It is an echo of the era when one civilization ends to give way to another. Since that battle, the map of the medieval world has changed forever. And in that change, the echoes of Manzikert still reverberate like the distant sound of horses on the steppe, like the final bell of an empire once called immortal. The Battle of Manzikert was thus not just an event, but a symbol of the price of pride and decadence. It ushered in the era of the Crusades, of the clash between two religious worlds, and also the beginning of the end of Rome. It was the first chapter in the epic of blood and faith called the Crusades, where men fought not only for territory, but also for faith, glory, and endless ambition. And it all began on a summer afternoon in 1071 at Manzikert, when the last light of the Eastern Roman Empire faded in the sky of Armenia.